Nana Bonsu, welcome to Succession Stories. I'm so excited to talk to you today because it's always great to speak to someone who's reading off the same song sheet. And you and I are both certified value builder advisors, and that's how we got connected. And I'm looking forward to our conversation about transferability and how we help business owners create a more transferable, valuable company. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Laurie.
Why don't we start with you? Can you share a little bit about your background and how you got started as an advisor to business owners?
So back in 2020, during the COVID pandemic, that's when I was a little bit stressed. So just from having worked in a big company and, having through that, my engineering background, I had supported M&A from acquiring different businesses. I realized that I did, and also having either founded or co-founded a couple of businesses, that was where my biggest calling was. So in looking around, I got hooked up with Mind Valley, and then through that got hooked up with Dr. Wadley, and then through that got hooked up with another advisor who helped me do some research. And I came across Value Builder. And the reason why I like the Value Builder system was because my previous experience had to build frameworks from scratch, whereas the Value Builder system actually had a system that was able to help an advisor build a marketing and sales system. So that to me was the big multiplier, not to mention that it was proven thousands of businesses had used the system to actually develop value. So in talking to them and in talking to other advisors who had been through the system and in applying my previous business, using the system and the methodology to my previous business, it just seemed to work. So that is what attracted me. I decided to give it a trial run, and that's I went ahead and got certified, and that's been my journey. I did a couple of pilots with a couple of people. They liked it. They did well. And so I decided to, keep it going.
Great, great. That's awesome. So you had a career transition of your own. So the topic of transitions is probably close to your heart. And that's something we talk about a lot on my show. And when I was a guest on your show, which I appreciated, and we should let everybody know that you have a podcast called Build Value by Choice. And what we do together, I think, is have a great conversation now about what is this topic about value building? What does this mean to a business owner? And let's break it down a little bit so folks can understand some of the language we're using here. So Value Builder is a platform. It's a software platform, and we use it as advisors with wonderful learning modules. But of course, we're bringing something to the table too, which is our experience. And with all of your engineering experiences and technical companies and your strategic planning background, I'm sure that again, you bring a lot of things to the table with your clients. So let's talk a bit about value drivers. There are roughly 8 of them. If we boil them down, which value drivers do you focus on first with your clients?
I tend to focus on the growth potential, and that's because it's tied into what is called the Scalability Finder. Even though it's not one of the value drivers, to me that is the fundamental. And I always the Good to Great book, has had a huge influence on my strategic planning thinking as far as business. And it talks about the hedgehog concept. So as I look at the scalability,
what is that? What is hedgehog?
Hedgehog is as you know, is a little animal that anytime a predator comes after it, it can roll itself into a ball with spikes to fend people off. So it's just about identifying 3 key intersecting things that makes you unique, you're passionate about, and drives your economic or your resource engine. And once you figure that out, then you can start growing on it and start differentiating yourself and applying technology to accelerate that for long-term, building to last and being able to transfer it for building a legacy and longevity. So that to me is the core start, the foundation. If you don't have the right foundation, you're hanging the leaves off of the wrong trunk.
So let's go a step deeper. We're talking about driving growth. Why is that so important? Why is that the first answer you gave me? Why growth potential?
Well, because a couple of things. Number one is that at some point, the one thing that is for certain is that everybody's going to exit or leave this planet at some point or retire at some point. So, but if we look at that as a certain point, right? Let's just draw that the line as your finishing line, right? Whether it's voluntary or involuntary, somebody's going to have to take it over, right? And so the question is, the value is that that's the starting point for that person. So how much growth, right? How much runway do they have after they take over from your finish line, right? And so that is key as far as the growth potential for your business, because it's not about your past performance, it's about the future potential for your financial performance, and that's why that is so important.
I think it's also probably worth noting size matters for companies, and companies of a certain size, we do talk about the size discount. Oftentimes people say, oh, well, what's the revenue threshold? It's probably around 5 million, 10 million, certainly a million and under, where you have more Main Street businesses are viewed as more risky because it tends to be so centered around the owner. And a company that is larger in revenue, that's more well established, that has the financials behind them to show, as you said, it's about the future potential, but it is also, isn't it, about what financials are in place today? Because if there's going to be a transfer of ownership, the new owners want to know that there's going to be a predictable flow of future, if the future cash flows need to be there. And if it's all about the business owner and the business is so tied to that owner, the success is so tied, then it could hamper that growth potential, right? It won't be as transferable. So I agree with you that growth potential is a great place to start. I do also want to acknowledge that the financial side plays into it as importantly because of the reasons I just said. What do you think about that?
No, I mean they're kind of interrelated, and I think that is absolutely spot on. And maybe that's probably because I just kind of assumed it's kind of embedded, it's kind of woven in there somehow, because the growth potential has to do with the growth in profits. So if you had the last 3 years, if you were able to grow profits 10 to 20% a year, if you're not going to grow that same amount the next couple of years, then your valuation is going to come down. So the growth is the growth in size, the growth in the revenue, the growth in your profits, right? And of course the reduction in the risk. So that's what makes it. So they're definitely interrelated. The financial performance and the growth potential are absolutely two key drivers to look at.
You mentioned the Scalability Finder. You're referring to one of the modules in the platform, which
Right.
is a fantastic module. I use it also in workshops that I do, just to give people a sense of what does it mean to create a scalable business. As you were saying earlier with this hedgehog concept, where if we can discover what is a niche, what is that market niche? What differentiates the business? What should they be scaling on? And then how to do it. Maybe you could explain the Scalability Finder exercise just at a high level so we get a sense of what it is that, from a nuts and bolts standpoint we're talking about.
Yeah. So the key thing is that you cannot just grow in everything, because if you grow the wrong thing, you may need to. So for instance, we're in a current environment where there's acute labor shortages and acquisition of talent, and there's inflation, all these different things. So the key thing is there are three things to identify using the Scalability Finder or your hedgehog, right? You look at what do you buy and sell, right? What products and services do you buy and sell? And so the question then is, how teachable are those products and services, right? And so you mentioned about the owner dependency earlier. Right? If your products or services are highly teachable, then the owner doesn't have. That means the owner doesn't get to be as involved as much, right? And then you take that and you say, okay, how valuable is it? How much can you differentiate yourself from other competitors or other folks in your industry for that particular product or service, right? And so that intersection then provides you something, because if the customers don't care about it, that's not going to drive your economic engine very well, right? And then on top of that, you find out, okay, how repeatable is it, right? So then you just say, okay, because if it's not repeatable, if it's just a one-time thing, again, that is not going to drive, growth, right? Yeah, it's just not economically viable. So you have those three inner certain circles. Once you have that, then you have the products and services that can grow, that can scale, that where, if you focus on differentiating yourself on those things, then you have the springboard in which to grow, to scale, to make your business more transferable.
Excellent. For business owners that you talk to, how do you think they would answer this question? And the question is, what's the biggest obstacle you're facing in transitioning your company in the future? That's been a survey question that's been out there from organizations like BEI, and they've asked that. And I know the answer generally, but I'm curious to hear what your conversations sound like.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of very, but it tends to come down to two things. That the main thing typically is that they don't think anybody could do their work as well as they can, because after all, the business, a lot of times, especially if they started the business, it's based off of their intellect, their certain spirit that they had that you can't just transfer to somebody. And so that is normally, the biggest thing, which is that nobody can run the business as well as they can. The business will lose its identity. But a lot of times, I think it also has to do with, it's not said, but when you peel the onion, a lot of times it has to do with fears also, the fear of what's next. Because if the business was their calling, right, what's their next calling after that? Right? So that is unstated, but a lot of times that's when if you peel the onion, sometimes that's what it comes down to. But they tend to think that nobody can do it as well as they can, because the identity and the spirit is embodied in that business.
Well, I was going to ask you another question, but I think you've sort of answered it, because the question is going to be, what's the number one myth or misconception that business owners might have about exit planning? And I think I would guess you'd probably answer the same thing, which is that that no one can do what they're doing in their business. How do you coach them out of it?
Well, I mean, I think a couple of things. The way to coach them out of it is, number one, try to get them to have other interests, right? And so the draw to do something else, right, gives them the motivation to be able to transfer as much of it as possible. Bring people along, bring somebody, a succession plan, in this case, some kind of succession plan, even if it's not formal, mentor somebody who can at least do it as well as possible, up to maybe 90%, 95%, right? Where the owner doesn't have to be there as much. And so that is, it's about systematizing their business. That's the number one thing that I coach them on it, systematizing it.
Do you work with any particular types of companies in certain industries or size, location?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to focus on companies generating $10 million in annual revenues or less. And because of my background in IT and financial services, I've also I tend to work in those industries, and I've also worked with e-commerce people. That fascinates me. Of course, not to mention educational technology companies. So
gotcha. That's a nice mix. Yeah. So there's some services in there, products.
Yeah.
And what would be something that if a business owner is listening and they want to get started, what would be the three things that you would say they should start doing in the next 3 months?
If they want to get started, doing what exactly?
If they want to get started, they want to learn about exit planning, or they want to think about their business transition, maybe what are some of the key questions they should be pondering today?
Right. So great question. So there are a couple of things. It's about the journey. It's about the phases. The one thing that they need to understand is that the transition or the transfer phase, they want to go out on their own terms, right? It can't just be, okay, yes, the exit plan, the transition planning. Because the other myth is a lot of times the exit plan, the term exit or the word exit sometimes connotes that like death or something, right? So it's exit planning is not about your life after death, right? It's actually about your life on earth right now. And so you have to think about, number one, the first thing you need to think about is what options, how would you like, begin with the end in mind, right? Like Stephen Covey says, what options, and understand what options you have. Because a lot of time business owners, they just only think of one or two options, right? So they need to educate themselves by identifying somebody, an advisor, somebody who can help them identify what options are on the table for them. And then once they identify those options, they can pick, in ranking order, which ones appeal to them. And then once they do that, then they can then work with an advisor, right? It could be the same. It could be a wealth management advisor. They could have a team. He could have a team, or he or she could have a team, and identify how much money, if they were to either retire or go do something else, right, is going to be enough to fund their lifestyle, right? Once they have that number, then they need to then identify what are then. So that's the second. The third thing is, how much is their business worth? Is the worth of their business enough to cover their financial requirement to fund their lifestyle? And then if there's a gap, that's when they need to then, the fourth one would be, how did they build up that business value? And that's when they talk to somebody like you or me. Or it could be the same person helping them with the exit planning as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Couple of fun questions for you, because I know you live in Maryland, but I'm guessing you're not originally from Maryland. Where are you from originally?
So my background, so originally born in New York, but raised in Ghana, where my grandparents are from. So I've kind of lived all over the place. So I'm kind of like a military child. So yeah, New York City by birth, raised in Ghana. I lived in a couple of different states, but lived in Maryland like continuously since '97. So that would be about 25 years now.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
And when you're not working, what keeps you busy?
Interesting. So a couple of things. I like watching sports. I'm into soccer. I watch all kinds of sports. I used to watch all kinds of sports, but what keeps me busy is sports. I like walking around the neighborhood. That interests me quite a bit, and spending time with family. So yeah.
Some of the simpler things in life. I love it.
Very simple. Yeah.
Okay. Well, last question for you, or rounding out two questions. One is, if you have a favorite quote that inspires you, you'd like to share.
Well, I mean, Benjamin Franklin said, "Don't put off till tomorrow what you do today." You do not, as a business owner, want to put off this idea of transition planning, because that is part of the business planning process. And so the sooner you can talk to an advisor about it, the better off that you'll be. You don't want to have any regrets, sometime down the line. So that would be my favorite quote.
That's a great quote, because it's not, exit planning isn't a negative. It is part of business planning. It's something that every owner should do. I love that. If people want to get in touch with you, Nana, what's a great way for them to reach out and find you?
Yeah, they can reach me on LinkedIn or Facebook. They can also reach me via email, nbonsu@infhorizons.com. Yeah, or they can go to our website, infhorizons.com.
Awesome. Nana, thanks so much for being with me today. It was really fun.
Thanks for having me.